Daniel had just closed the worst deal of his career. Not a small loss either. Months of work, a client he'd poured everything into, a presentation he'd rehearsed until 2 a.m, 3 nights in a row. Gone. His boss had been professional about it, which somehow made it worse. He drove home on autopilot, radio off, windows down, just needing the air. He walked through the front door. His girlfriend Priya was on the couch with her laptop. She looked up, read his face immediately, and said what any caring partner would say. "What happened? You look awful. Come sit down. Tell me everything." And Daniel did something Priya had never been able to make sense of. He said he was fine, went to the kitchen, poured himself a glass of water and stared out the window for 10 minutes like she wasn't even there. Priya closed her laptop. She sat with the quiet for about 30 seconds before it became unbearable. "You know you can talk to me, right? Why do you always go somewhere I can't? Reach you?" Her voice was gentle. She wasn't angry. She just wanted in. Daniel turned around, looked at her and said, even more quietly than before, "I just need a minute." And Priya, who had done nothing wrong by any reasonable standard, felt the door close. Neither of them slept well that night. Welcome to Psyche Shift, where we pull apart the mechanics of human behaviour that most people feel but can't name. That's exactly the territory we're walking into today, and I think by the end of this, something is going to click for you that changes how you read your own relationship. Because the distance that opened up between Daniel and Priya in that kitchen wasn't about communication. It wasn't about emotional availability. It wasn't even really about that one bad night. What was actually happening? There's a need that lives at the centre of how most men are wired. Not biologically in some oversimplified way, but psychologically shaped over years of conditioning that begins before they're old enough to question it. It's not love. It's not physical connection. It's not even respect in the way most relationship advice frames it. It's the unshakable belief that they are capable, that when their world gets complicated and heavy and unpredictable, they have what it takes to carry it, that they don't require managing. Researchers who study male identity development keep bumping into the same pattern across different cultures, different age groups, different economic backgrounds. A man's sense of self is disproportionately anchored to his perceived effectiveness, his ability to navigate, to handle, to figure it out without falling apart. Now, pause here, because this gets misread constantly. That's not a superiority thing. It's not ego in the way people casually throw that word around. It's actually closer to fragility, if we're being accurate. Because a self-concept built around competence is a self-concept that can be chipped at, quietly, repeatedly, by the people who are closest to him. And here's where it gets complicated. The chipping almost never comes from cruelty. It comes from care. Let's build a picture. You're 6 months into a relationship with someone you genuinely adore. He's funny, he's thoughtful, he's present. One evening he's cooking, actually trying, following a recipe, focused, and you notice he's doing something in the wrong order. You mention it, the way you'd mention anything helpful, because you want the meal to turn out well and you want him to know you're engaged. He smiles and says thanks. 2 weeks later, you're driving somewhere new together, and he seems confident about the route. You're not totally sure he's right, so you open maps on your phone just in case. He says he's got it. You keep glancing at the screen. He gets there fine, but he's quieter at dinner than usual. A month passes. You're assembling something together. Furniture, some flat pack thing with 47 pieces, and after 15 minutes of watching him work through it, you pick up the instruction sheet and start narrating. I think that panel is flipped. It says here to attach the side brackets first. He nods slowly, keeps going, doesn't say much. None of these scenes are dramatic, there's no argument. No one is being mean. In fact, from the outside, this looks like a functional communicative couple who does things together. But watch what's building underneath. Each of those moments sends a signal, not the signal the woman intends, which is I'm here, I'm involved, I care, but the signal the man receives, which is something closer to I'm watching to make sure you don't get it wrong. And you know what's fascinating? Men rarely say that out loud. They don't name it. They don't come home and say, I felt undermined 3 times this week. They just go quieter. They initiate less. They stop volunteering opinions. They start waiting to be told what to do rather than taking charge of things. And then, this is the part that breaks relationships without anyone understanding why, the woman starts feeling like she's carrying everything alone. So she compensates. She steps in more, takes over more, and the man, experiencing this as confirmation that his judgment isn't trusted, retreats further, round and round, neither one realizing they built the loop together, now the move most people miss entirely. The reason this cycle is so hard to interrupt is that both people in it are behaving reasonably. The woman isn't wrong to want things done well. The man isn't wrong to feel stung by constant oversight. The problem isn't behavior, it's translation. 2 people trying to say I love you in completely different languages and wondering why the message keeps getting lost. For a lot of women, emotional closeness is built through shared process, being in it together, talking through decisions, staying looped in. When she offers input, she's saying, I'm invested in you. That's real. That's genuine. For a lot of men, feeling loved is inseparable from feeling trusted. Not just trusted in the abstract, trusted specifically to handle things. When she offers input at every turn, what he often processes is, she doesn't think I've got this, even if she absolutely does. Same action. Opposite message received. And the gap between those 2 realities is where relationships start quietly falling apart while both people insist nothing is technically wrong. There's a term in relational psychology worth knowing: earned disengagement. It describes what happens when someone spends an extended period in an environment where showing up authentically keeps costing them something. Their nervous system essentially decides the math isn't worth it anymore. This is why you'll see men who are open, curious, warm in the early stages of a relationship become harder to reach over time. Shorter answers, less initiative, a kind of polite distance that wasn't there before, and everyone around them says some version of he just changed, or he shut down as though it happened on its own. But here's what those observations miss. Withdrawal is almost never random. It has a history. It has a sequence of small moments that accumulated until the cost of being present started to outweigh the reward. Consider James. 3 years into his marriage, his wife Elena genuinely couldn't understand why he'd stopped sharing things with her. He used to tell her about his day, his ideas, the things he was figuring out at work. Now he gave single-sentence answers and changed the subject. What Elena didn't track, because individually each moment seemed small, was that over the previous 2 years, almost every time James shared an idea, she'd offered an improvement. Almost every time he made a decision, she'd had a note. When he planned their anniversary trip, she'd quietly re-researched the hotel he chose and suggested a different one. When he handled a situation with a family, she'd walked him through what he should have said afterward. None of it was malicious. All of it landed in James as, your instincts aren't quite good enough. So James stopped bringing his instincts to her, not out of spite, out of self-preservation. And Elena experienced that as him becoming emotionally unavailable, which made her feel alone, which made her try to stay more involved in the things he was handling, which confirmed for James that she didn't trust him to operate independently. They went to therapy. The therapist said they had a communication problem. They didn't have a communication problem. They had a translation problem that had been running for 2 years before either of them noticed. So where does this actually shift? Not in a single conversation, not in one vulnerable night where everything gets said. It shifts in the moments that seem too small to bother with. The moment you notice he's figuring something out and you feel the pull to step in, and you choose not to. That moment is where trust gets rebuilt. Not the declaration of trust, the demonstration of it. Asking his opinion on something you could have decided yourself. Letting a plan he made run its course without auditing it in real time. Watching him navigate something imperfectly and staying quiet, because imperfect navigation that he owns is worth more to the relationship than a flawlessly executed plan he was talked through. And to be direct about something. This isn't about women making themselves smaller. It's not about suppressing competence or pretending not to know things. It's about understanding that the how of offering input matters as much as the input itself. Let me show you how that works. And what's your read on this? Carry completely different relational weight. One positions him as a student, the other positions him as a peer whose judgment you're genuinely curious about. You can land in the same practical place with either approach. Only one of them builds something. Stay with me here because this is the part that tends to shift how people see everything else. A lot of conversations about men and intimacy operate on the assumption that emotional openness is something men resist by default, that you have to coax it out, create safety for it, wait patiently until they decide to come forward. And there's a version of that which is true. But what almost never gets said is this. For many men, emotional openness isn't the starting point of feeling safe. It's the result of it. The path to a man being genuinely vulnerable, not performed vulnerability, not saying the right words to end an argument, but actually letting someone into the interior, runs through competence, through feeling like the person he's opening up to sees him as capable, not as a project, not as someone who needs to be refined, as someone who, even with his rough edges and wrong turns, is fundamentally enough. When that foundation is solid, the walls come down, naturally. You don't have to schedule a conversation about his feelings. They start showing up on their own. Wrap your head around that. The women who consistently describe their partners as emotionally present, forthcoming, easy to talk to, they're almost never the ones who engineered it through persistent emotional inquiry. They're the ones who built an environment where showing up fully didn't carry a tax. And the men in those relationships will tell you, often without realizing what they're describing, that they feel respected at home. That word keeps appearing. Not loved, not supported, respected. Because for them, respect and love aren't separate categories. They're the same signal wearing different clothes. This conversation would be lopsided if it stopped at what women need to understand. Because the full picture requires looking at what men bring to this dynamic too. Silence is not a neutral act. When a man absorbs 100 small moments of feeling undermined and never names any of them, when he retreats instead of speaking, he is actively participating in the breakdown. He's choosing the short-term comfort of not having an awkward conversation over the long-term health of the relationship, and then, eventually, he wonders how the distance got so wide. Your partner cannot navigate around a problem she doesn't know exists. That doesn't mean a debrief every time you feel stung. It doesn't mean cataloguing grievances. It means getting specific and calm in the moments that matter. Something as simple as, I want to work through this one myself first. I'll come to you if I get stuck. That sentence is information. It gives her a framework. It's not a rejection. It's an invitation to trust you, which is something most partners actually want to offer but don't know is being asked for. The men who stay invisible in this pattern and then grow resentful of outcomes they never tried to change are contributing to the same cycle they're frustrated by. Full stop. Vulnerability, real vulnerability, sometimes looks less like sharing your feelings and more like saying, this matters to me in a way I haven't explained yet, and I want to try. Here's the part of this conversation that tends to make people uncomfortable. When a man's sense of competence gets systematically eroded at home, over years, not weeks, it doesn't just affect how he feels in the relationship. It affects how he functions outside of it. His confidence at work, his willingness to take risks, his relationship with his own ambitions. The home environment for most people is either a place that restores them or a place that drains them before they've even started. And a man who spends his home life navigating an environment where his judgment is perpetually in question doesn't get to set that down when he walks out the door. Think about what it does to a person's sense of self when the place they're supposed to be safest is also the place where they feel most audited. This isn't about blame, it's about consequence. Relationships don't exist in a sealed container separate from everything else in two people's lives. What gets damaged inside that container shows up everywhere, and the reverse is equally true. The man who feels genuinely believed in at home, as whose partner's default orientation toward him is "you've got this" rather than "let me check your work," that man moves through the world differently, more settled, more willing to stretch, more capable of the emotional generosity that makes a relationship worth being in. This is why the stakes aren't small. What looks like a minor habit, the gentle correction, the quiet oversight, is actually shaping the person your partner is becoming over time, and by extension, shaping the relationship you're building together. Most couples never have it, not because they're avoidant or conflict averse, but because they don't have language for what's actually going wrong. They fight about the dishes and the tone and who forgot to book the reservation, and underneath all of it is this unspoken, undiagnosed gap in how they each understand what the other needs to feel loved. The couples who bridge that gap aren't the ones who have the most patient or the most emotionally intelligent partners. They're the ones who got specific, who stopped describing behaviours and started describing what those behaviours felt like, who got curious instead of defensive when their partner described an experience that didn't match their intentions. When you stepped in while I was handling that, I felt like you didn't think I could manage it. As a conversation starter, you always take over, everything is a dead end. And on the other side, when I stay involved, it's because I care about how things turn out, not because I don't trust you as a conversation starter. I was just trying to help is a dead end. The language is different, the outcome is different, and the only thing that changes is whether both people are willing to get past the surface of what happened and into the truth of what it meant. We started with Daniel coming home after the worst day of his professional life and disappearing into silence while the woman who loved him couldn't find a way in. That scene plays out in some version, in some form, in almost every long-term relationship at some point. The details change, the names change, the specific sore spots change, but the underlying pattern, a man's need to feel capable quietly colliding with a woman's need to stay connected, stays remarkably consistent. What changes outcomes isn't grand gestures or breakthroughs. It's smaller than that. It's a woman choosing to stay in her seat when every instinct says step in. It's a man choosing to say one real thing instead of going to the window. It's two people deciding that the version of this relationship they could have is worth the minor discomfort of doing something different. You already understood this on some level, which is probably why you're still here. The question now is whether you're willing to take what you understood and actually apply it. Not in theory, not in a future conversation you're mentally rehearsing, but the next time the moment arrives. Because that moment is going to arrive, and it always passes faster than you expect. What you do with it is entirely yours to decide. If something in this landed differently than you expected, tell me which part in the comments. Not what you think you should have taken away. What actually shifted. That's the conversation worth having.